Hey everyone, we're gonna get started here. If you want to open up your phones to the prayer that was sent out in the link, we can open in a prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So welcome to, this is our second session of the Theology on Tap series, Who is My Neighbor? A lot of this was really developed from Pope Francis's recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, on, who is my neighbor? And in the encyclical, it really talks about the Good Samaritan and how we can relate with our neighbors who are both next to us as well as those all across the globe. So tonight, we are going to talk about religious solidarity and all of us being one in this world, regardless of different religious backgrounds. So tonight's speaker is John Pinter. John is the Executive Director of United Religious Community of St. Joseph County. The URC works to transform principles of Catholic social teaching into 21st century leadership. John is a small business owner of Pinter Consulting, which works with a mix of nonprofits, educational institutions, and entrepreneurs. He has served as a member of the St. Joseph Parish Council, South Bend Rotary Club, near Northwest Neighborhood, and Rebuilding Together. John and his wife Laurie have 3 young adult children, and fun fact about John, he makes his own salsa, so you can ask him about that. So please help me in welcoming up John.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. Let me set up here for just a quick sec. Oh. Doubling down on the mic. Can you hear me all right? Very good. So, well, it's good to be with you tonight. I want to start by saying a few things that I'm not, okay? Get those things out of the way. So first of all, I'm not a theologian, nor a trained minister, ordained, or anything like that in any faith, though I am a cradle Catholic. So there'll be no intentional heretical statements tonight. If they're anything, they'll be accidental. Second thing is I was a little worried that I would not be able to adjust from a non-Zoom world. So when we talked about it, I was told no PowerPoint and no Zoom. And I thought, well, how am I going to be surprised at the next thing I'm supposed to say? So this is my Zoom chart and where I'm going to try to get us by about half hour, 45 minutes from now. So this is my first one here down in the lower left corner. That is the premise setting part. I'm going to talk a little bit about some personal experiences. And then right about here, I want to generalize it all with you tonight. So I want to start with a question actually that you'll see on the small discussion group, but we're going to try to address it right now. So I'm going to throw out 5 words and see if you want to throw out what they mean to you, okay? I'm going to throw them all out at once. So the first is religion. The second is spirituality. The third is charism. The fourth is ecumenism. And the fifth is interfaith. So think about those for just a moment. And if anybody wants to thought, it's like, what does one of those words mean to you? So when I say religion, what's religion, all right? That should be a pretty simple. Anyone want to throw out what they think of when I say the word religion? Real loud.
A system of worship to a higher power.
Okay, can we use that as our working example today? Do you mind repeating? A framework of worshiping to a higher power. Close enough? All right. How about spirituality? A lot of people think of those as sort of the same thing, right? Well, for tonight, I'm going to talk about spirituality, or if I use the word spirituality, it's like within a religion, the way we act on things. In Catholic spirituality, we think the importance of going to Mass and participating in the Eucharist. That's part of our spirituality, but it's also got the tenets of things like Catholic social teaching along with that. So charism, that's not just charisma without the A on the end. Anybody involved in what?
Gift of the Holy Spirit.
Gift of the Holy Spirit? Okay. And so I used to work for a Catholic religious order, the Holy Cross Priests here. They have a charism of their founder and how they practice those things. They're educators in the faith. If anybody here has been to a Jesuit school or part of a Jesuit parish, you knew you are part of a Jesuit place because of the charism of that place. So now ecumenism and interfaith. What does it mean to be ecumenical? Or what do you think about when you say ecumenical? It's a word that can get used improperly in this statement, or in this talk that I'm going to give tonight. We refer to it as two different religious organizations that accept the teachings of the other. So it's a mutual acceptance of the two. And then for interfaith, just means different faith groups are working together. So I just want to have that as a little bit of a background before we get rolling here. So here's my premises for you. 5 things. 1, interfaith is not a religion. Second, interfaith relationships, actions, and solidarity are good things in and of themselves, even when they don't seem to have an outcome. So the idea of being together in interfaith opportunities is something that I believe is important. We're not converting each other, so why bother? Might be a question for that, but just being together in interfaith kind of work is important and good. The third is that the interfaith commitment among Catholics of all kinds is consistent with church teachings, particularly as we think of the tenets of Catholic social teaching. And a subcorollary for that, for me, is that interfaith engagement strengthens Catholic commitments and has an engagement opportunity with young Catholics in particular, perhaps even younger than are here today, but that this is part of the way that I believe we can grow the church. Fourth is that Catholics have a lot to learn from teachings of other faith that will strengthen our own commitments. And fifth, there's a lot of overlap between our topic tonight, interfaith dialogue, and things like diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're all in the work that we do in our organizations is probably really important to us right now. So that's my working background with what I'm going to be talking about today, okay? And if you don't believe me on the Catholic social teaching part, want to read in solidarity. This is one I pulled out today. Solidarity, if there's 7 or 10, this would be the 6th. We are one human family, whatever our national, racial, economic, ethnic, or ideological differences. Learning to practice the virtue of solidarity means learning that loving our neighbor has global dimensions in an interdependent world. So hopefully that's some evidence of that. All right, so we've finished with the premise part of things. So anybody here know where Evanston, Illinois is? Okay, that's right. Okay, it's just north of Chicago. It's the first town north. It's the home of Northwestern University. It's where I grew up. This is in purple to honor Northwestern, although I didn't really have any Northwestern thing. So I wanted to talk about, I was thinking when putting this talk together, where did I start having these interfaith experiences, even if I didn't think of them, and why do they relate to me as important now? So my mom in particular, my mom, my parents in general, but my mom in particular, was a believer in the idea of parenting while dragging around, which you guys are trying to practice tonight. So, which I commend. I think it's a great, my poor kids got dragged to everything as well. So I'm a little older than you all. I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s in Evanston. And Evanston's a pretty cool town. There's a lot happening there. It's kind of like a small city, but it gets the advantage of being in the Chicago area. But there's a lot going on in the church. And in this context, I'm talking about the Catholic Church. Vatican II, Saturday Mass, which was just, we don't even think twice about, but it was a big deal in those days. And there were a lot of things going on in communities as well, including my hometown, Evanston, around the Civil Rights Movement, around the Vietnam War. The Democratic National Convention was going to be in Chicago. There's a lot going on that the church and people participating in had to say something about. Now, I'll admit that in second grade, I was not the best behaved kid, and I was a Catholic school kid at that time, and I got told that maybe this wasn't the place for me. And I moved into a public school, a great public school, that at the time, as desegregation was happening, the city of Evanston said, we're going to make this lab school. And so I got exposed to all kinds of different cultures, all kinds of different religious practices. I had 4 best friends, 2 Jewish, 1 black, 1 I'm not sure what he was in terms of religious, and I was the only Catholic in the group. And so I got dragged to bar mitzvahs and to Friday services and things like that. So I learned an awful lot and didn't think of that as an interfaith experience. I just thought of it as a friendship experience. Evanston had a history of legalized segregation, even though I think of it as a pretty liberal, hip suburb. There was legalized segregation. We had a long-term African-American community there. And in that time, the idea of segregation was starting to come apart. It was before Martin Luther King was killed, but our city started taking a strong look at that. And I went to marches with my mom. And church communities from all over the city would wind up at AME Church on Emerson Street, Ebenezer AME Church on Emerson Street in the city's historic Black district, worshiping, listening in, getting amazing music, amazing talks, things that were very, very different than what my experience in my home parish was. And a third that came to mind, I kind of forgot about this, and a friend of mine reminded me, if you've ever been a member of the YMCA, the traditional wives that had the residents, they're long since gone from places like South Bend. But in Evanston, there was a black Y and there was a white Y, right? And everybody else Y. And that even in the late 1960s, when finally it was decided that shouldn't be a place that was segregated anymore, and the Hare Krishnas took over that old Y. I don't know if anybody here has ever been around the Hare Krishna group, but talk about a different religious experience happening within our city. So all this stuff was going on in my hometown. Years later, anybody recognize this? This is my artist rendition of Delicate Arch in Utah. We moved many years later. I got married. We moved out to Utah. That's a really bad picture of it there, but I'll sell a copy of that if you like. It's on our license plate. But we lived in Utah for about 5 years, and I'd never been to Utah. Didn't know very much about it. Anybody know what's big in Utah? Mormons. Okay, it's the room of the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ or Latter-day Saints, LDS Mormon. The church now officially asks us to call members Latter-day Saints. Now, everyone I know who's practicing says, well, we still call ourselves Mormon and LDS, but I'm going to try to respect that term. So it's the one place in the U.S. for someone like me, a white middle-class male, could go and actually be in a minority role. So when you go to Utah, anybody here been to Utah? To ski or something like that? Okay. As a tourist, okay. To the Temple Square? Okay. And probably somebody got your name and okay. Well, one of the things you learn pretty quick is, first of all, is that the church, when you're in Utah, is not referring to the Catholic Church like we might hear tonight. So the church was a whole new thing. It makes sense in a way. The state itself is about 70% members of the Mormon Church or the LDS Church. And so it was, as I say, a unique experience for me. A Jewish colleague of mine where I worked said, well, Utah is the only place where Jews are Gentiles. It's part of the way that the tradition works there, which I thought was a pretty funny thing. So, two things that came to mind that I learned a lot about in Utah. First of all, I felt very, very welcome all the time. But if you've probably run into young adults who are serving missions. And they come out here to Indiana. You probably ran into missionaries who guided you around the place there. You run into them all over the world. And I had run a volunteer program called Holy Cross Associates, or been in one actually before that, and wondered how in the world is it such a part of the culture, the charism of the LDS Church, that it's normalized for 19-year-old men and young women to go off and do these missions. They have their parents to pay for it, they have to fundraise for it, and go off for 2 years, pretty much beside, not a lot of contact with home. And I thought it was fascinating. Everyone I ever met that was willing to talk about it, we shared ideas about that to learn about it. So the second one was bishops. The Mormon church is a lay church, and there's bishops all over the place who run the local organization. So, and this is where the notion for me of ecumenism versus interfaith came into play. I was running a disability organization. We were trying very hard to get congregations to be involved in helping older folks to stay in their homes, and we could not get the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to participate. The biggest, there are LDS wards all over the city. We had everybody else involved, and I finally, we had a good contact within the church, and I said, what is it that we cannot get you to participate in our ecumenical outreach to help older adults stay in their homes? He said, it's the word ecumenical. He said that connotes a changing or an exchanging of beliefs and vows. He said, we're just not ready to do that. I said, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? He said, interfaith. Call it interfaith and we'll be all in with you. Instant changing of the word. I'd used the word very, kind of cavalierly in this grant, and we discovered as soon as we changed that, we had incredible involvement in the interfaith world there. So anyhow, I'm going to move us to South Bend here in just a minute, but before we do that, I wanted to have Kristen Marie, if she would, I don't have the mic up here. I have to get you a mic. Can we borrow the hand? This is a story you'll know well.
Testing. Jesus answered, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who both stripped him and beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. By chance, a certain priest was going down that way. When he saw him, he passed on the other side. In the same way, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he traveled, came where he was. When he saw him, he was moved with compassion, came to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the host, and said to him, take care of him. Whatever you spend beyond that, I will repay you when I return. Now, which of these 3 do you think seemed to be a neighbor to him who fell among the robbers? He said, he who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.
Thank you. Okay, who can name that story, that parable? Yes. Okay, the Good Samaritan. All right, everybody knows that one, right? And everybody knows the right answer to that, correct? Is go and do as he did. Now, why do we call it the Good Samaritan? This is think in that interfaith world before we move into talking about that. Why do we need the word good in there? Samaritans weren't good, okay? Broadly, all of them, the presumption we had as the readers of this is, yes, this one was different in some way. And it's kind of the framework in which hopefully we can start to take apart the ways that we look at other faith traditions. Good Samaritan, why don't we just say Samaritan? He did the right things. The people that were good didn't do the right things. This is actually, Jesus was being challenged by a lawyer. So I don't know if anybody here is a lawyer, but it is the build up to that story. But keep that thought in mind with you. I learned a different way of looking at that actually when my parish did some work on, it's called Just Faith, to take a different look at some of the way the gospel reads out and say, well, if we're really encouraging Catholic social teaching and relationships with other faith traditions, do we look at, one, why do we have to call somebody good in that state when they did the thing that anybody, he did very Christian actions in that case? And two, what else is going on in that situation? Why is the road dangerous? Why are there robbers there? Why would people walk across the street and ignore the person? Keeping those things in mind, we move here to South Bend, all right? I had the chance, and I want to get more into what URC is about, but I moved here about 26 years ago to run that Holy Cross Associate Program. Was very involved with our parish's Social Justice Commission. One of the ways that we had to learn an interfaith component of what we were involved with was refugee resettlement. So if you're not familiar with how somebody becomes a refugee or who a refugee is, it's someone, quote, who's unable or unwilling to return to the country of their origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Most of the families that were coming to our area when we got involved in this, and we just jumped in as a parish and started receiving folks that were coming from all over, were leaving in part because of religious persecution from where they were originally from. Baha'is from Iran who couldn't live there peacefully, Muslims from different parts of Iraq, where it became a real strong partner here. And so we as a parish had to learn an awful lot about other faith manifestations in order for us to be successful with that and to be inclusive in our approach. And this is what really brought me in first real relationship with local Muslim communities here, which has become a source of great joy for me, great welcome, and something that at the end of this will encourage you all to spend a little bit of time learning about. So, all right, so URC, United Religious Community. I got to do a little bit of reading here in order to tell you about this. But the United Religious Community, our mission is to encourage religious cooperation and understanding, to affect constructive social change, and to advocate for folks' basic needs. Anybody here familiar with the URC or the Advocacy Center? A little bit, okay. It was a much more prominent organization when I first moved here. I didn't get it down to be non-prominent on purpose or anything like that, but I've been doing this work for about 6 years. And we really stick close to that mission about what it is that we're about. The history of it was, originally it was put together, it was funded by a trust by someone who died back in the 20s, or put the trust together back in the 20s with the idea of being an organization of the different Christian traditions. They eventually involved Catholics in that as well. And then in 1972 said, we're gonna do a makeover of the whole thing, we're gonna become an interfaith organization. So those three mission points are what we're about. Some people know about us for the Advocacy Center that we do, which really is less about advocating for people than helping people with basic human needs. We're seeing a real rental crisis right now in this community. People are worried about their electricity because of COVID, not being able to pay bills, and so we're doing an awful lot of work in that area. And in our focus for the coming year is to continue that work, but also to build on the interfaith solidarity that we have already going in the community, to build on our welcoming Michiana network and hopefully be ready to resettle refugees again in a year or two, to work with families affected by poverty and COVID, and to really have a faith-based role in understanding racial justice and helping faith communities connect with people around this time. There's an initiative that the city was involved with called My Brother's Keeper, which really looks at building up the capacity of young men and boys of color, and then everybody else does well when those folks do real well as well. So Here's one more quote before we move to the next section. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "It's appalling that the most segregated hour of Christian America is at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning." You've probably heard that phrase recently with King Weekend and all. Anybody got any reactions to that? Good, bad, indifferent? Whether it's appalling or not, I have sort of a different view on it. One is that it leaves off the fact that a lot of the traditions that are in our communities don't practice their worship on Sundays. We would leave out Jews and Muslims who practice on their own Sabbaths on Fridays and into the Saturday. But also questioning whether it's an issue. We want to become more diverse in the work that we do, and sometimes our faith traditions aren't quite ready for that. It's something that we need to work at hard to bring people in without necessarily making them feel like we're trying to convert them to that, but also for us to be willing to go out. That's what I'm going to promote here in this last part. So I'm going to give you some statistics. So now we're here in Indiana. What is Greater South Bend? So I'm thinking of this as all of St. Joe County, but also our surrounding area. There's an awful lot of a very religiously diverse community around you. Your neighbors are really different if you look hard enough. So I looked up some numbers. Catholics are actually, according to recent census statistics, the second largest or second most practiced religion in the area. Anybody want to guess what the first is? It's Methodist, okay? There's a lot of different strains of Methodism, but all sorts of church communities in the Christian tradition that include startup churches that you and I could actually start a Christian church if we decided to. I'm not going to do it tonight. But folks in the African American traditions that are congregational, meaning they have a bishop, AMEs, African Methodist, Episcopalian, the Christian Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist, and lots of independent traditions. There's a huge growing Spanish-speaking tradition, both Catholic and evangelical traditions. Large independent and growing groups in the Apostolic, Pentecostal, and Evangelical churches. Of course, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Many Orthodox traditions in our area. Now, most of us have been to something at the Greek Orthodox Church or maybe the Serbian Orthodox way south. There's a Ukrainian Orthodox group. There's a Russian Orthodox group. There's a group that meets every couple of weeks. And in some of those, the ecumenism is such that the priest who leads those traditions could lead Mass at your parish on one Sunday as well. So there's all kinds of other traditions as well. There are over 100 different countries of national origin represented in our area. And then when you get outside of Christian traditions in that interfaith world, there's 3 Jewish houses of worship here. Temple Bethel, which many may know about, Sinai Synagogue, the conservative church on LaSalle at Eddy, and then a Hebrew Orthodox synagogue. There's the Jewish Federation of St. Joseph Valley, which is not a house of worship, but rather coordinates the different strands of Judaism. The Islamic Society of Michiana, which is our main Muslim house of worship or mosque, and those Christian, Jewish, and Muslims are the Abrahamic traditions. But we have a Baha'i community in South Bend and in Mishawaka. If you know the Sunnymead area, their house of worship is over near Adams High School. There's a Sikh society. There's a Gurdwara actually right out here, and one over near the airport. There's a Hindu temple, Buddhist congregations, and many other different traditions. The reason I mentioned those in particular is these are all places that in a non-COVID time would love it if you come and sit in and listen and worship with them. They're all places too that when there has been a tragedy, a shooting at the synagogue, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the attack on the mosque in New Zealand, that the community came together, and these were congregational leaders who knew each other and could put together a community gathering to explain what is Sikhism, what do Muslims believe, and what is it about Judaism in our community, and why are these groups being attacked? And then when the attacks in Sri Lanka happened against Catholics there, Christians, those were the first groups to come together around that. So they're ready, willing, and able for us. So last couple parts here. this big question for me is, with almost everything I do, is so what? Why does it matter? Does it matter that we have a strong interfaith world here that we would hope to engage folks like you in? So if you believe that being engaged in civic life matters, then religious participation and interreligious cooperation matters hugely. So if you made a mosaic of what makes a great community, it would have good jobs, good education system, nice neighborhoods, nice parks, good hospitals and healthcare, and in there somewhere would be a well-organized community of faith leaders that knows each other and is part of planning for that community. So there's good evidence that shows it works as well. If you ever follow Pew Research, I don't recommend that you necessarily do it, but if you're interested in finding out about this, two things that are happening in decline together, which aren't good for our communities, is participation in religious life, religious practices of all kinds, and participation in community, things like voting, civic life and all. They're both going down. It's not a cause and effect, but there's strong evidence that as those two things happen, communities start to fall apart with it. So, of course, we have, so in our URC world, we have ways that religions that have significant differences in the way they carry things out. Catholics and abortion, for example, is one of the difficult issues for other faith traditions that don't have a strong balance on that. So we, as the United Religious Community, we specifically do not get, we have a different dogmatic level to say we're not going to look at various practices like that, but we definitely want to encourage conversation about them. But all the world's great religions are against things like poverty, against violence, and against injustice, and for things like welcoming the stranger, inclusion of people who are marginalized, and commitment to community. So when we remember, like in your definition of religion, that religions are run by people and though divinely inspired, they're still organizations subject to human frailty and abuse. People at all levels can moderate this. Us, the practitioners of these religions, it's more important for us to stay involved and stay engaged when those things happen and encourage those cross matters. So, all right. This next section here, the What Now section, is going to be where's my host, where we let you all break off and discuss a few things and we'll come back together. But are there any general kind of questions that you might have at this point you want to bring up? Or comments? Yeah. Kristen, Mary. Marie.
What would you say is the difference, or like where's the line for like having true humanism and really like caring for everyone while not compromising and watering down the truth?
Okay, let me see if I can paraphrase your question. And remember, I said I'm not a theologian. So, but your question was, how do you, how can ecumenism exist while not watering down your own faith or having to give in on your values? So for in the interfaith world, one is to talk about it and say, what are these differences that we have? Our practices and differences, our doctrinal views, what's absolute for us, and what are things that we can learn about from whichever side we're on. I'm not saying avoid discussions on hot topic issues or whatever. And I'll give you an example for us, and for me as a practicing Catholic, but also for URC. There's a lot of discussions going on around town about social justice issues. So what's in the box? So if you throw everything in the box and you suddenly get conflicting views, like there's a very strong atheist group in there. We have great respect for it, can work with anybody in there, but we're not going to promote an atheist view as a social justice thing. We would promote the idea that everybody has a right to those views, but that's something that we as the URC wouldn't jump in on. I'm going to give you an example that we used as URC that was a real challenge for us. We tend to not get overly involved. We tend to not get much involved in issues like advocacy, legislative advocacy. But a couple of years ago, when the Indiana State Legislature decided to take up hate crimes or bias crimes law, it had failed years before that, in part because of strong opposition by the Indiana Catholic Conference, which is in essence the organization of the bishops of the state of Indiana. And we as URC said we're going to promote this. There's nothing in the law that says you're promoting a particular kind of lifestyle or value or choices or whatever, but rather that a crime, when there's an underlying crime, like if I go out and slash your tires, that's just a crime. But if I do it because you're Catholic or because you're not Catholic or because you're for or against something, then there's potential of a bias crime with that. We felt it was time for Indiana to get on board with that, and that, and remember going and talking with the folks at the Indiana Catholic Conference saying, where are you at with this? Because a lot of the other faith communities are for this. And said, well, you know, sexuality fits into this, and it's that question of where, in particular around homosexual rights. And said, we understand that the law, I don't mean to speak for somebody else, but our take on it was, they're saying, we understand that the law is not promoting any particular kind of lifestyle or values or anything like that. And so we're not going to be out front on this, but we feel it's important because we know that Catholics can be victims of hate crimes and bias crimes. So I don't know if that's by example, but I don't know if that answers your question. So, but you'll have a chance to ask those kind of things in the small groups. Did you have a question too? Okay. So.
Yeah. Thank you, John. John did a great job. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. We will have a chance for more questions at the end. We're going to break off into small groups for about 15 to 20 minutes, and you guys can discuss the questions that were sent out in the QR code that should have been sent to your email. So if you want to pull that link up and discuss the small group questions, and then we're going to turn and we'll come together as a large group and discuss maybe what you talked about in the small groups or any other questions that you may have. So go ahead and find a small group, and then we'll come back together. Thanks. So hopefully you guys got a chance to discuss the questions. And now, so it's kind of like an open mic. If anyone has anything they want to share about what they discussed or any insights that they had from it, or really any questions, now is the time just to kind of share and enter into that discussion. Do you have a question? And Michael and I will be here passing out the microphones. If you do want to share and you want to just like really bring up anything that you guys had discussed and talked about. Questions, you guys, your group?
Hi, I have a question. My name is Michael Shakur. I guess, how do you square the traditional like medieval Catholic, like the unum sanctum, outside of the church there is no salvation, with Pope Francis signing a document with the Grand Imam of the Madrasa in Cairo saying God wills the diversity of religions? And how do you square those two ideas in like a theoretical sense, and how do you like deal with that on like a very worldly level when someone says you can't interact with Muslims, you have to be Catholic, you have to preach the gospel at all times? How does that work for you, and what do you think about that?
So I'm not so old that I remember the medieval times, but so how do I approach it as like in my role as URC would be, be influenced by the fact that I'm a practicing Catholic, and I have had those conversations with my long deceased grandfather of that was the day when the one and true, and this is the only way. In my URC role, it would be to invite people to the notion that you can hang on to all those things. Remember I said interfaith is not a religion, and the idea is you're trying to build on relationship, on connection, on a greater community, none of which are contrary to even the medieval term that you used in any of those faith traditions. We were having kind of fun discussion here is like, how do we attract people whose faith traditions, particularly religious leaders, it's like, well, my only role as my church, my congregation, we only exist to convert people to Christ. That's it. We're not against this idea of other traditions or anything like that, but that's our reason for existence. I think I would say we just continually try to engage people with the idea, and then when they start to meet folks from other faith traditions, hopefully they'll see good conversion. We're not the master orchestrators of that. We're just trying to bring people together to encourage some of that. So I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer to your question. We're not trying to get everybody. I mean, it'd be great, I think, ultimately, if everybody had this notion that among the things that draw us together as a place that we live here on earth is the idea that we have to get along and cooperating with each other. One of my favorite, I'm not a quote person, okay? But one of my favorites was a priest in the Holy Cross in the Holy Cross Order, Tom McDermott. He was a lot of fun. He has this spirituality of kind of crazy, disorganized or whatever. And one of the things I remember him saying at a retreat that he was running was, Catholics are like everybody else. We want to get into heaven, just like every other tradition. And we want everybody to get there with us. I'm not a theologian, reminder there. So, sure.
Who else has a question? Anyone else want to ask John anything, or any other comments based off like the questions we had talked about, or really anything?
Private conversations only.
Yeah.
I have a second question, if that's okay. You said your group is the URC's kind of gotten smaller. Do you think that's because you've been successful and interfaith dialogue is more common now than it was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever? Or do you think there's some part of people are less religious now than they once were? And do you think that's affecting how the URC and people around kind of act?
The reason we're smaller is one of the ways that the original, and I know this from doing the studies, we got a notice a couple months ago that we were going to have to pay. This will get to your question, okay? But we were going to have to pay for a safe deposit box. And we're like, we have a safe deposit box? And some of you may remember a number of years ago when Geraldo got to open, I think it was some gangsters thing, and it was a big TV show. And we're like, we got to go down and find out what's in our safe deposit box. Turns out nothing except our founding documents, all curly and gray and all. And it drove us to look at some of the historical time, really from 72 onwards. We were really much more of a social service agency. And so we gave if you will, the downtown churches, and including in that are the two synagogues that are in downtown South Bend, said, we get people who come knock on our door looking for help, and we don't know whether they need it or not. So how about if we give that money to the United Religious Community and you guys meet that out? And so that was a big part of what we did in the 70s and 80s. As the community spread, as churches in the downtown area got much smaller in many cases, some got very, very small or closed. People moved out to the hinterlands, if you will. That centralized part of what we did really ceased to exist. And so that's a big part of the reason that we're a whole lot smaller. The appetite for interfaith discussion, I think, kind of goes like this, but we tie it real closely to questions on welcoming of immigrants, and now around racial equity in particular. And we think that those are going to be important ways for faith communities, which have a lot to say about that, to continue to draw together. And the other thing is, and we have one priest here, maybe more, I don't know, but one identified, they're busy. The faith leaders are busy trying to keep the place open, minister to folks, worry about the roof, talk to the kids, all those kinds of things. And they fit the notion of this interfaith discussion somewhere in there. You have to be really motivated by it. Many of the smaller traditions know they need to do that, want to be in that position to do that, because they say Rabbi Michael Friedland is the most Catholic person I know, because he really gets this notion of we need to be about all things, because we are a small community, we're getting smaller, and Judaism is not well understood, and so some of those smaller traditions are much more involved in it. That's a long answer to your question, sorry.
Thank you.
Who's next? Who wants to give Michael a break from questions? Any other questions?
I do have more questions if necessary, but I don't think anyone else wants that. So
Gotta love it.
Do you know how to ventriloquist style, make it sound like it's coming from somewhere else? No,
I was just going to tell the other Michael to ask my question, and it'll be okay. But
It's all you.
what can we as young people do? Like, do I just go to the synagogue on Friday afternoon?
Great question. Great question. So that was kind of the ending point, and I'm happy to hang around or whatever. So I do have some ideas for you. Let's pretend we're after COVID, okay? And so among the most welcome places that you feel is probably any of our parishes. That when I remember as we would get refugees come and they would come in and participate in our worship services. They're extraordinarily well treated, loved, welcomed, and all. And I think that you would find that in many of the houses of worship that you would go to here. If again, in a post-COVID time when we can actually do this, because most of these places are not meeting in person, would be to work that out and say, I'd like to come, maybe make a call and say, I'm going to show up, and somebody be watching for you. The Shabbat services at either Sinai or at Temple Bethel would be very welcoming to you. You can go online right now, even in a non-post-COVID world, the current environment, you can tune into all of these different worship services. If you were interested, I mentioned the mosque here is one of the places I feel the most welcome. I'm not becoming a Muslim. I feel very strong in my tradition, but it is truly a place that once you go and someone will take you through. I brought some materials here in case you're interested in looking at it, but one of the things, if you come as a guest in many of these places, they'll give you a little thing and say, do you want us to have somebody sit with you or work through and let you know what's happening next and all? Because when you go to a different tradition, that's why I asked one of those questions of if you've done that and it's real different from what you're used to, it can feel real alarming and you're not quite sure what's going to happen next or whatever. So somebody will walk you through that, and then we can all figure that out. So there's a great book. I'm going to leave this somewhere if you want to take a picture of it. I don't have the book here today. I loaned it to somebody. And there's a bunch of great books here on if you're just interested in learning more about how different traditions work. We have, it's in my briefcase, but we have this almost like, if you will, the Bible of different traditions. There's 4,000 religious traditions in the US. And if you're going to encounter a new one, and it's not an instruction manual, but if you want to find out, well, what do Seventh-day Adventists believe, and when is their worship service, and what are the people that go to their services called, and is it a priest, is it a minister, who's in charge of that? It'll give you some of those ideas around that. The book I'd recommend that really helped me cement my understanding of this is called Countering, it's got kind of an odd name, Countering Religious Extremism, The Healing Power of Spiritual Friendships. It's by a professor, David Carlson, who went through his own journey of conversion, and he's a researcher and studier of interfaith things at I'm blanking on the name of the college, just south of Indianapolis, private school there. And he documents different ways that traditions have people, the congregants, not the official, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, but rather people that sit in the pews or pray on the prayers come together. And they have created this group. It's called Focolare, I think that's the name of it. It's a Catholic lay religious order whose charism is about outreach to Muslims. And they've decided to create an interfaith group down in Indianapolis. They just get together for lunch every Wednesday at Shapiro's Deli. And I sat in with them one time. And it's like, we don't come and say, okay, today we're going to talk about the reading from the Quran. Next week it's the Catholics. They just come there and they're friends and they get to know each other in this manner. That's the kind of thing that that young people could, just get to know people, take the leap of faith that it would take in order to just reach out and get to know somebody who's maybe practicing tradition differently from you. If I can so this is kind of my what's next, some suggestions. I don't want to overwhelm you with a whole bunch of things. There is some great stuff going on online right now. There's a class called ND, the Ansari Institute it's free. It's called ND for Everyone or something pretty close to that. And the Ansari Institute has got a discussion. It's Thursday nights on race. What do race and religion have to say about the other? It's excellent. Even though it's already started, you could jump in at any one point. You don't have to raise your hand. Nobody's going to call you. You may not even know you're there because it's in that Zoom where you're down below the bar, It is truly an excellent class. It's facilitated by Professor David Hooker. I highly recommend that. It only goes till the middle of March, but it's every Thursday. If you want to learn more about Islam, there's another free class. Notre Dame has one actually right now. It's during the day, so it's hard for professionals to get to. But actually, St. Luke's United Methodist Church out of Indianapolis has a statewide outreach, and they're doing a monthly review of what's in the Quran. And it's not like we're doing it as Methodists, checking out the Muslims. It's well-researched, well-accepted, and has a lot of Muslim involvement with that. And I'll leave this sheet, so if you want to take these ideas down. Before COVID hit, we copied that lunch idea at URC and just said we only did it once a month, but we had something like this. We would order food that would work in any tradition, wouldn't be offensive to anybody, and just invited people to come in, and we didn't facilitate discussions. We just had lunch together, broke bread, finding those kind of opportunities. We hope to go back to that afterwards. I'll throw out a little pitch. If things we can get enough people get inoculated from the virus that we can actually do it. The National Day of Prayer is always the first Thursday of May. This year, that would be during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. We always would do a breakfast down at the Century Center. Not the greatest breakfast because it has to be, meet all kinds of dietary needs. But because it's Ramadan and Muslims fast, they've invited us to come out to the mosque. They have iftar after the sun goes down, and they prepare an amazing meal. And they're very excited. They're hopeful. Inshallah is the word I hear a lot from Muslims, meaning if God wills it, that we'll be able to go there. And that would be a great way to connect. So there's a lot of different organizations and ways to connect on that. But I think the main thing is taking the risk and saying, could I go to that? Could I participate in that class? Could I get to know that person in the same way that we try to make friends? You take a risk, or if you're trying to date somebody, we have to step out of our comfort zone at some level. It's a lot like that in the faith-based world as well. So.
Awesome, John. Thank you for sharing those ideas. I think I saw a hand here, and then we'll go, all right, there, and then we'll go to you after. Thank you.
Hi. So I had a question in terms of communion. So as Catholics, we're not supposed to be receiving communion at other faith denominations. How do we politely and respectfully decline communion reception if we were to go to a different church?
So did everybody hear that? If you, in the same way, if I was Muslim visiting Catholic Church, I would decline communion, or hopefully the faith leader might know that I'm coming. But you're in the reverse situation. I think you just say, my practice is that I would only do this at my church. Is it okay? Do you have a way of receiving a blessing or some other method like that? And go with it. Like if you go to many of the traditions don't have Eucharist or even in other Christian traditions, or maybe it's only once a month, or it's practiced differently. Nobody's going to be offended by you passing or saying, identifying yourself. So I don't think that would be too much of an issue, but you most of these traditions are not going to expect you to convert on the spot for them. So, and somebody else had a question. Mike is getting his exercise tonight.
All right, thank you for coming and talking with us. I was reflecting on that quote by Dr. King you stated earlier about the most segregated hour being 11 a.m. on Sunday. So in South Bend, as you may know, there are a lot of immigrant groups, and each one of them basically founded their own church, even if they were the same religion. A particularly extreme case of this is on the west side, we have St. Patrick's, the Irish Catholic Church, and St. Hedwig's, the Polish Catholic Church, right next to each other. Mm-hmm. And even now, we have a lot of Catholics seem to be fiercely loyal to their own parish. I'm guilty of this too, so I don't really get a pass here. But my point is, is getting like other Catholics to engage in interfaith communication and whatnot. How would you advise doing that?
Well, it's a really, really good question that I have thought a lot about and don't have a great answer on, okay? Where the Catholics are about 25% of the population in South Bend, and in other cities, much bigger parts of that. When you look at how different traditions are structured, when I mentioned, like, do they have a priest? Is it lay driven? Is there a main, like Rome and a lot of traditions don't have that. And so the pastoral lead, whoever's in charge, if you will, even if it's a lay kind of an organization, if it's a motivation of that person, they're going to encourage that. We in the interfaith movement, this is not just in South Bend, okay? This is everywhere that I talk to people. Harder groups to get involved are Catholics, Catholic Church in particular, or people that are practicing within Catholic Church, African American traditions, and some of the more really apostolic, evangelical kinds of traditions, because they don't quite see the value in it. Around Catholics, if the leader of the parish, or there's a strong social justice commission or something like that has assent from whoever the pastor or the pastoral leaders are, it's more likely to be encouraged. But for the most part, they're not going to discourage it. I've never run into that where, but it's like, my point is, churches are really busy trying to do other things. Can I I'll tell a funny, this was in a Catholic tradition joke, but you could probably put it in any way. So it was actually Father Tom McDermott told this joke. He said, the young assistant pastor comes into the rectory at the end of the day exhausted. And the pastor says, "Why are you so tired?" He said, 7 o'clock mass. And then I had to go talk to the kids, and then I had the confirmation group, and then I had to go visit the folks at the hospital, and then at noon we had the city council meeting, and in the afternoon I was doing an outreach with the food bank, and then tonight I had to meet with a couple that's getting ready for a whole bunch of things like that. And he said, "So I'm just tired." And the pastor says, "What'd you do for the blind today?" And it's like, that's kind of the point of, we're really busy in that officialdom of running a congregation, where it was like we barely have time to get everything else done. And so lay leadership, lay involvement, like folks with you all, can really help that church. But it will probably take a sales job if it's not part of what your parish is already about. What did you say your parish was? St. Pat's? Pius. My general interaction with St. Pius is they really are very good to work with around these things. We worked with them closely around refugee stuff. And this was less when I was involved with URC, than when my days when I was running another nonprofit organization, and we were involved with St. Joe Parish. They were great for helping out. So, they're a big, busy parish. So hopefully it builds value with parishioners who then, I think one of the questions I didn't ask was if I used the term missionary with members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how that fits in it. That missionary experience for them is very much conversionary. My take on what it means to be mission, I talk all the time about this is mission work, and what I mean by that is the idea that I'm going to take my shoes off and go and learn about your tradition, your congregation, your people, and it's less about me doing anything for you than about me coming back and talking about the community and the engagement that way. So it's much more conversional for me in that mission sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Are we good on time, or do we have time for any more questions? Or okay, yeah, I think we're gonna keep going, but if we could just thank John one more time.
Thank you.